Attack on Titan? More like Attack on Shite. In all seriousness, the new Attack on Titan movie is pretty bad. That's not to say I didn't enjoy it. I actually had a fair bit of fun with this film. Is it entertaining? Yeah, fairly often in fact. Is it a good movie? Absolutely not. By no measure of the word. No. Nah. Way. Adapted from the manga and anime of the same name, Attack on Titan is about the plight of the human race in an apocalyptic fantasy setting where all of the small remainder of humanity lives snuggled up nice and cozy in the small confines of a large wall, due to the fact that the rest of the known Earth has been taken over by monstrous titans, making humanity no longer top of the food chain. The original source material on which the film is based is pretty damn stellar when it wants to be, and being that this was a Japanese production and not an American one, I actually had high hopes for an Attack on Titan movie, and while the end product is fundamentally flawed in ways I'll soon be discussing, make no mistake, this is no Dragon Ball Evolution. Now if you want the spoiler-free review, because I know a lot of people won't have seen this film yet, I'll give you the following cliff notes and I'll put some warning as a heads up before I get into real spoiler territory. The film suffers from being an adaptation. Trying to condense a hell of a lot of information into such a brief 1 hour 40 minute runtime makes for hellishly uneven pacing and a lot of exposition. The immediate intro instantly sets us up for one of the many info dumps by delivering a quick narrated monologue where Eren says, "Reet, 100 years ago, some massive twats with knee dick showed up out of nowhere and started chewing all humanity like they were cheeky Nandos. So we were just like, here, let's build a big massive wall and tell them to F off." It's the same setup as the show and manga, but everything feels a lot more rushed. Major changes to the story have been created to aid with the ease of adaptation, some of which help the film but others hinder it greatly. The movie does its best to cater to fans in some ways, like having the potato-loving Sasha from the series still be a potato-loving nutter in the film, despite its drastically different tone. But in other places, is going to upset a lot of people who wanted to see some more stuff they love represented. Some of the choices for who made the cast has left major narrative points and fan favourites absent from the big screen adaptation. There's no Levi, and we know how much you all love him. Eren's parents are also not mentioned, which if you've seen the show you'll know play a very important role in the narrative as well as the emotional crux of why we root for Eren. In their place is a new narrative that includes a forced relationship between Eren and Mikasa, vomit, which even becomes a love triangle, double vomit. Characters are in no way fleshed out at all because aside from a small 10-minute start where nothing really happens, the film wants to go to complete breakneck speed, pausing to breathe only for a minute or two to give its characters more motivation to build on the connections between them. That said, while I'm painting a disastrous picture here, it does have a fair bit more going for it than people had let on. The Titans are amazingly handled in this movie, and the CG is done to a lot better standard than the small out-of-context shots in the trailer seem to suggest. It's not photorealistic and at times it can look really bad, but for the most part it's a nice stylized look that fits well with the colour palette of the more grounded, grimy aesthetic the film has went for. The action is also well handled a pleasant amount of the time. However, some segments are rough around the edges, particularly when characters are flying around with the series' trademark maneuver gear they use to fight the Titans. All in all, it's the epitome of mixed bag. What's good is really good, but it sits there in a sea of misfires. It also doesn't do well to explain anything to newcomers, so if you've never heard of Attack on Titan, probably don't let this be your introduction to it. But if you're a fan of the show, I do actually cautiously recommend you watch it. By movie standards, it's objectively bad in almost every sense of the word, and I'll clarify why when I talk a bit more about specific scenes from the plot in a more spoiler-filled breakdown. On the other hand though, it has enough going to be a fun romp for certain fans. Depending on how particular you are with your adaptations, you're going to have some very strong feelings for this film. If you want something that sticks very strictly to the show you love, don't even attempt it. If you're not as bothered by changes even when they make the narrative suffer significantly, you'll find a lot of fun seeing characters, settings and monsters you love get the big screen treatment in what's essentially a messy but somewhat enjoyable horror/kaiju movie. Now close the window if you don't want anything ruined, but if you aren't worried about spoilers, I'm going to do a bit more of a criticism referencing specific scenes in 3, 2, 1. Right, so as I said, this movie suffers from being an adaptation, and that's apparent from the get-go, as it just bursts straight into the action without any time for setup, and throughout the entire film they'll randomly introduce elements they've yet to explain to newcomers with sudden exposition-y flashbacks. A point where it's obvious it's going too fast for its own good is at the very beginning. The movie starts with the opening narration I mentioned before, and then we're introduced to Armin and Mikasa, who then go meet Eren, who is pointlessly standing on a deactivated bomb and looking at nothing when we're introduced to him, by the way. I have no idea why. And then they're just kind of dossing about, all doo-dee-doo-doo-doo, let's go and have a wander over to the wall, I'm sure nothing bad, but oh bollocks. Now, I know this big red bugger's whole shtick is just appearing out of nowhere, but even still this comes all too sudden, because it occurs before we have any real idea who these characters are. So when they're running in terror from the Titans at this point, you don't really care at all about them. If you'd seen the show and someone asked you to describe Eren, you could say he's headstrong, loyal, determined, occasionally unapproachable, often emotional, motivated by a combination of love and revenge, a fleshed out character. If you'd only seen the film and someone said describe Eren, you'd probably say he's Director Kikuchi had said that he wanted this film to be accessible to complete newcomers, and if that's the case, I think he went the wrong way of doing it. Yeah, by all means change the story, it's your adaptation, you're free to do what you want with it. But could I have some character with these characters, please? I get that the motivation to live is good enough because it's one we can all relate to and primal basic instinct, but when you're adapting from a text with unique developments that flesh out and give everyone their own reason for trying to fight the Titans, I kinda like to see something like that in the movie. I don't care if it's different, just so long as it's not worse like this watered down version. That said, when the Colossal Titan does suddenly show up, what happened next is goddamn awesome. For the next 20 minutes I was picking my jaw up off the floor. The initial attack is so damn perfect you could have fooled me into thinking this was going to be an excellent movie, but unfortunately it hits you with its best shot too early and the rest of the film can't hold a candle to this brilliant moment. In the reveal, the Titans are terrifying, the tension palpable, the threat incredibly real. As our three main heroes flee through the crowded streets, I was in awe of how well everything was handled. There's a moment where Titans tear the roof off of a building full of people and start munching their way through whoever's inside like a greedy wedding party after the DJ's just announced the buffet's open. And as the helpless victims reach out from the locked and crowded cage of death as blood seeps from under the door, the imagery is horrifying. Call me insane, but I actually prefer these Titans to the ones in the show. Yeah, they could be kinda frightening, but the live action aesthetic just puts these guys over the edge. There feels to be a lot more variety in shapes, sizes and faces with this interpretation as well. They all move differently and adds a layer of unpredictability, and in keeping with the anime, some do look dozy as shit. It is, however, a massive shame that later in the movie this scene is somewhat retconned in quality when we see one of the squad members in the army that is established later in the film throw a Titan. Aye, that's right. This twat walks over to one of these giant monsters and flings it like a frisbee. This is never addressed again, and it doesn't make any sense when it happens. It also makes you think the Titans aren't all that scary anymore, after doing such wonders to set them up as a defining threat. I mean, if they can be manhandled that easy by Terminator here, why not just send him in to go hulkamania on the arses and call it a day? Jesus. Now moving on, this opening scene ends, fans will likely be upset to know, with the apparent death of Mikasa, writing her off for a significant chunk of the movie until she appears alive as a surprise twist later. Eren is seemingly unable to save her, and that gives him his reasoning to join the Survey Corps and decide to go on Titan smashing. This would be a perfectly fine replacement motivation to the death of his mother from the show, if I gave a shit about these two people, but since show excluded, I only know their names and that apparently they were mates / maybe implied lovers, I don't really care. And it's a shame because this is the main place the film is really held back by. There's no characters, just cannon fodder you're supposed to identify with. I mean, Armin in this movie is particularly piss useless. Despite being one of the main cast, his only role seems to be so he can be saved by Eren at the end of the movie, but otherwise you could remove him from the film entirely and it would be the exact same. The other thing I want to dabble with is the acting. It's not good, guys. It's hilarious, but it's not good. For the most part, everyone acts kind of just a little bit over the top, which is fine, but my god, there are some weird moments, particularly when it comes to that shitty love triangle I mentioned earlier. There's a scene later on that sets off a reaction of awkward and strange events. Things start to go awry for about 10 minutes after Mikasa comes back and Eren goes to apologise for not being able to save her. It's genuinely well handled at first. You actually get a sense of that character thing that's been missing for so much of the movie. Mikasa's clearly got feelings for Eren, but there's a hesitancy to forgive him. Eren feels a strong guilt over abandoning her. It's all very good. But then the tone shift is so sudden, I'm surprised I didn't get whiplash from it, as then we see an entrance by Mikasa's implied new bit on the side, who strides in like a pound shop Johnny Depp, flailing his arms maddeningly like he's trying to play eccentric, but it looks more like a seizure. And he's all like, "Oh, Mikasa, nibble this apple I have, Mikasa," and suddenly he's holding up this random apple, which Mikasa starts eating, except she doesn't start eating, she mimes eating, for reasons. While we're trying to get our head around all this madness, we cut back to Eren's face and he's all, "You treacherous apple-eating snake woman, bitch," and he's looking all betrayed and heartbroken. All the while this emotional piano music plays in the background as the new boyfriend starts to hold her and continues to passionately feed her this apple in front of a dejected Eren. Now it's just sat there like, what the what? Is this a surreal comedy sketch? It didn't stop there as well, because following these events Eren goes outside to release his anger. At least I think that's what he's doing. He just kind of closes his eyes and grabs his neck whilst going, "Yeah!" and then suddenly screaming. It was like the director went, "Okay, in this scene, I want you to act like you just stubbed your toe and got stung by a bee in the neck at the moment you found out your mum was dying, but at the same time, someone told a really funny joke. Honestly, the reaction is just beyond belief, really, and I've no doubt once the DVD comes out, it'll get some way ingrained into meme culture. We calm down a little bit immediately afterwards though, and the film starts to try to give us some dimension to its characters again, as Erin is stopped from screaming by a new character, Hyanna, and they share a moment of downplayed bonding as they have a sit down and they talk about home, the war, family, and how she misses her kid, and you're like, this is nice. I want more of this amongst the action. Then suddenly she just whaps out her left tit and gans, here, hold this boob, before dumping it in Erin's hand, who, I shit you not, reacts exactly like the guy from Italian Spider-Man. Just when you think it couldn't get any more unintentionally funny, Erin notices a Titan looking into the building over Hyanna's shoulder and doesn't say anything. He just kind of freezes and stares, and I think what the director was trying to suggest was a crippling and paralysing fear, but the music and tension did not pair with the image of him still joyously cupping a stranger's knockers. To me it felt less like he was paralysed by fear and more weighing up the tit to see if the Titan was worth ruining the moment for, before going, dem titties, nah, these are kinda good, these, let's just hope it gans away and see where this goes. In a way, besides the initial attack during the opening, that sequence of events is probably my favourite 10 minutes of the movie, but for all the wrong reasons, and it baffles me how someone who did so good in other areas of the movie could make this so wonderfully clunky to the point of hilarity. The only other serious problem I have with the movie is the lack of conclusion. There's a plotline with some random bloke wearing a sack on his head that goes absolutely nowhere, and I get there's going to be a part 2, but giving no resolution to this whatsoever and having the film just kind of go, Erin is a Titan now, and then just end was a bit weak. All it needed was a sentence or something to set up hope for the next film, like, with this, we can fight back. Credits roll. Easy as that. It's not anywhere near as bad as other films' sudden halts, but I totally wasn't ready for it to finish when it did. So to recap, it ain't great, not by any stretch of the imagination. It's messy, it's butchered its characters, it's unevenly paced, it doesn't really have an ending, it's poorly acted, the Titan throwing is stupid as shit, it has a hilariously random surprise boob, some of the Titans look dumb, the dude with the sack on his head makes no sense, if it's set up for the next movie it's at the expense of this movie, and the lack of diversity in the nationalities of the cast make for a clunky universe. Like, is this set in Japan now? Because this is a pretty German looking town. But at the end of the day, there's moments, just brief little snippets of greatness. And if you cling to them with all your might, there's something here to enjoy. It's just a shame that something is about as hidden as the Titans' dicks.